Hi, welcome to the first webinar from the North American Hedgerow Society. Now, this webinar originally took place on the 7th of July, 2021, and it was designed to coincide with the North American Agroforestry Conference, which took place a week earlier. Due to some technical difficulties, however, which were mostly because I forgot to press record, the first couple of presentations, including my own and one from Jake Murray from Topsy Farms, weren't recorded. So I'm taking this opportunity to re-record my presentation. And luckily, Jake's was a narration over his own video, so we're going to include that in the we're going to include the original video in the final presentation that goes out as this webinar. And thank you to everyone who has been patiently waiting for this recording to come out. It's been a little while. I hope you enjoy it as much as we did doing it in the first place. A little bit about myself. I'm speaking to you here from Mount Wolf Farm, which is a CSA run, a family run, community supported agriculture farm here in Caledon in Ontario. I've been coordinating the development of the North American Hedgerow Society since it emerged from workshops in Ithaca in 2019. And I'll talk about that a bit later. I'm an ecologist, actually, with 15 years of experience in UK conservation, finally working for the Wildlife Trust. My focus was on landscape ecology, and I specialized in hedgerows and citizen science. So I ran the Hedgerows for Dormouse project for the People's Trust for Endangered Species between 2009 and 2011, and latterly set up the Hedgerow Heroes project and the lottery-funded Hedgerow Heritage campaign for Surrey Wildlife Trust towards the end of 2018. I've been an active member of HedgeLink, which is the UK technical advisory group on hedgerows. I suppose I like to think of myself now, since I'm living in Canada, as a kind of HedgeLink foreign correspondent, but you'd have to speak to the rest of the group to guarantee that. So I've been managing the hedge laying in the Ontario Landscape Project since I was invited here by Professor Steve Quilley of the University of Waterloo in 2016, along with Nigel Adams, who's speaking on this webinar today, and Geoff Gielen from the Netherlands, who isn't with us, but fondly remembered in the hedgerows that have been laid around here in Caledon. So I came to Canada in 2018 finally to manage the project, and now I'm a PhD student with Steve at the University of Waterloo, and I'm focusing on I'm focusing on post-growth livelihoods, focusing on political economies, and the narratives that can arise from land skills and craft communities going forward. So just in the first year, well, going on to the second year of that. So I'm going to bring up my presentation as well. And just before we get started on this, it's really important for us to for me, coming from Caledon and Ontario, to acknowledge the fact that we are on land here that has been protected and cared for by Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, including the Huron-Wendat and Haudenosaunee peoples, and most recently the Mississauga of the Credit First Nation. I acknowledge, well, I'm grateful to live and work on this land, and by doing so give respect to its first inhabitants. And I acknowledge cultural injustices of the past and have a desire to continue to work towards a full truth and reconciliation in the work that I continue to do on the farm and within North America. So the agenda for this workshop going forward, we have a number of presentations which last approximately 30 minutes. I'm going to talk about the hedge laying in the Ontario Landscape Project. We have a presentation from Topsy Farm. These are the presentations that will be that we've recorded again, and then we go straight into the original presentations from Steve Gabriel from Wellspring Forest Farm, and then the expert panel Q&A after that, and they'll be in part 2. This video will be split up into 2 parts, with those 2 in part 2, and a kind of open discussion as well on the North American Hedgerow Society, which exists for its members. So it's really important to think about, just as we get started, to talk about what is in the name of hedgerows. In North America, hedgerows are woody linear features, which are actually known by many names, not just hedgerows, interchangeable names, things like fence rows, shelter belts, and windbreaks. And the North American Hedgerow Society, as it was inaugurated, was about all of these things, really, but in particular has taken a special focus on on a type of hedgerow that requires management to create a living fence. So, and this practice can be found across the world and through time, in fact, as well. So it's not just something that is found in Europe, but perhaps we can say that that the skills have been perfected there. In essence, what we're talking about in terms of a hedgerow as a living fence is a dense stock-proof barrier. And some of these other forms of hedgerow don't meet that definition in terms of they're allowed to grow up without any intervention or management. They may be very gappy at the base, and therefore they don't meet the requirement of being a living fence. However, we will see that there are lots of different definitions depending on how you're farming, where you're farming, and what you want. So we try not to be too specific in our definitions. One of the things that we can focus on is, in terms of a managed hedgerow, is what's been called the hedgerow management cycle. And the hedgerow management cycle was first proposed by and developed by HedgeLink in the UK. And the cycle really starts with the origin of the hedgerow, which in many cases is when the hedgerow is first planted. But it could also be the time when the hedgerow was first, the land was first cleared, and natural succession meant that a strip of land, the rest would have to be managed, of course. Natural succession means that plants within a strip grew up to form some kind of linear boundary, and growth would take place. And at some point, an intervention would occur, which would mean that the hedgerow was trimmed. Now, as often is the case with hedgerows planted to be linear living fences, the trimming would take place on a regular basis, and in the UK and in Europe, sometimes this can be once a year, which can and does have quite detrimental effects on hedgerows if they are trimmed every single year at the same point. But that's beyond the scope of this webinar at the moment. So after the hedge is trimmed, the hedge grows, and then at some point the hedgerow might be reshaped. So instead of just the growth, instead of trimming a hedgerow instead of managing a hedgerow to be one aspect of when thinking about hedgerows as living fences and the management necessary to keep them dense and thick and stock-proof, one can think about a concept called the hedgerow management cycle. And this was developed by HedgeLink and in the UK with a large input for when thinking about definitions of hedgerows, specifically related to hedgerow management, we can think about the hedgerow management cycle. And this was initially developed by the HedgeLink group within the UK. And it views the hedgerow as a very dynamic system, one that continues to grow throughout its cycle. And restricting that growth is something that can end up being quite detrimental to the hedgerow in itself. However, we do have to recognize that hedgerows, if you want to manage hedgerows to be stock-proof fences and thick and bushy, then you need to have some form of intervention. So the hedgerow management cycle talks about a number of different stages, where from the stage of planting, or if you're working with a natural boundary that you want to turn into a living fence, such as a forest boundary, perhaps you've started off by coppicing and are looking for the stalls to regrow. So you start off with planting, and there's successive stages of growth and trimming and growth and reshaping of the hedgerow. So you might want to consider, from when you first plant a hedgerow, you want to trim it quite hard in order to encourage the growth of lateral shoots from the plants, rather than all the growth and energy going into the vertical stems. And you might want to trim that on a regular basis, but not on a basis so regular that it's inhibiting the growth of the plants. So a lot of hedgerows have been managed in the past in UK and Europe once every year, and it's been found that that kind of regular trimming really does lead to, especially when you're cutting at the same height, it does lead to stress on the hedgerow and eventual thinning out of the base, and can actually lead to the death of the hedgerow too. So perhaps regular cycles of growing, trimming, and every time you trim, don't trim to the same height. Maybe allow the plants to grow up to maybe a couple of inches every time you cut, slowly allowing the hedgerow to grow, which is what it wants to do. And then during the lifetime of the hedge, you may want to reshape it, perhaps into to give it a batter on each side, i.e. so it's thinner at the top and thicker at the bottom, allowing the light to get into the hedge, and then continuing to allow it to grow until it gets to a height, normally between about 2.5 to 3.5 meters, where you can see that the stems are starting to get quite thick, and the side growth in the base isn't happening so much anymore, when the hedgerow needs rejuvenating. And there are different ways to rejuvenate a hedgerow. One is, as we've talked about just earlier, is coppicing of the hedge, which involves cutting everything down. But if you want to maintain a stock-proof barrier, you're going to have to use something else. And this is where the traditional rural skill of hedge laying comes in, where you cut the plants at the base for about 2/3 of the way through the base and lay them over, as we can see in the picture at the top. So why would you want to plant hedgerows in the first place? This is something that comes easily, perhaps, to many people used to hedgerow landscapes, but you know, it's recently been pointed out that hedgerows give a range of wonderful services to the landscape. And it's not just with farming and land management, but for instance, we've talked about the idea of a stock-proof barrier and boundary, but also in a farming environment, we're looking at the prevention of erosion of soil through the wind and water. Hedgerows can regulate the water supply to crops by taking up water when it's plentiful and releasing it during times of need. They're a really important source of pollination, insects that pollinate, and as well as flowers and plants that need pollinating. They can actually be used in urban development as well. Studies from the University of Surrey in the UK have shown how important hedgerows are in management of urban pollution. Now, of course, one of the most important services that hedgerows can provide for our current climate change challenges is carbon storage. And there's been a number of studies to show how important hedgerows are for carbon storage. As well as carbon, we also can plant hedgerows to reduce the flood risk. So you're managing the amount of water that's flowing over the land by planting barriers to overland movement of water. So you're slowing the flow in the landscape by keeping the water on the land as long as possible before it reaches rivers. And then finally, there's the idea of hedgerows as a fuel source. And many hedgerows, particularly in parts of northern France, are planted as lines of trees that are then managed. So they are coppiced, and the wood is taken away and chipped and used in local community heating projects. Hedgerows do actually have a history in North America. Certainly the types of hedgerows managed hedgerows do have a history in North America, and it's not surprising to know that this started with settlers in the late 1700s and 1800s. You can see here a picture of Hedge Farm, which was the residence of Joseph A. Caldwell in Delaware County on the east coast of the US. And in Paul Boursiers' excellent review of hedgerows at this time, and in excellent order, the gentleman farmer views his fences. Paul points out the reason for many of the hedgerows being planted in the eastern US at that time were this idea that farmers wanted to convey a sense of perhaps their own self-importance in many cases, but also this idea of status, a sense of enlightened ideas and values that they were presenting as, people who cared about the land and saw that caring about the land as order and enclosure. And this was very much in keeping with similar things that were going on in the UK in terms of, the Enclosure Acts at the time, which used a lot of many miles of predominantly hawthorn hedgerows to enact the Enclosure Acts, which were a kind of early the management of hedgerows does have an The management of hedgerows does have a history in North America, and it's not surprising to know that this is largely in collaboration. The management of hedgerows does have a history in North America, and it's not surprising to know that this coincides with the settlement by North America of Europeans, Northern Europeans. So in the late 1700s and early 1800s, there was a lot of cross-fertilization, if you like, of knowledge about hedgerows that was coming into particularly the eastern counties of what is now the US. The picture that you can see there is Hedge Farm, which is the residence of Joseph A. Caldwell, a self-styled gentleman farmer of Delaware County. There is a really excellent treatise by Paul Boursier, writing in the 1980s, called In Excellent Order, the Gentleman Farmer Views His Fences. And he talks really about hedgerows being very important for a certain type of farmer, both from Europe and various parts of from various parts of Europe. And he talks about these farmers as planting hedgerows as a vehicle of communication, conveying the status, ideas, values, feeling, and meaning. These people were coming over from the UK with thoughts about, these were, tutored in the Renaissance in ideas of managed hedgerows in North America do have a history, and it's not surprising to know that this coincided with the settlement of the US from Europe. So in the late 1700s and early 1800s, there was the first surge of interest in hedgerows and hedge laying. You can see here a picture of Hedge Farm in Delaware, which was the residence of one gentleman farmer, Joseph A. Caldwell. Be interesting to know if that farm still exists, whether the hedgerows are still there. Paul Boursier, the historian writing in the 1980s, has an excellent treatise on hedgerows and hedge laying at this time. And he talks in his treatise, which is called In Excellent Order, the Gentleman Farmer Views His Fences. He talks about how hedgerows were incredibly important for farmers at the time, a certain type of gentleman farmer, and they were a vehicle of communication, conveying status, ideas, values, feeling, and meaning. So these farmers wanted to convey the fact that they cared about the land in a certain way, and that way was a form of order, putting order onto the landscape through well-managed hedgerows. John Spurrier was also at the time writing about hedgerows, and he was one of the first people to write about hedge laying and how one manages a hedge through the practice of hedge laying in this early time in North America. And these people were using hawthorn hedgerows, hawthorn was a plant of choice for anyone planting and managing hedgerows, and we used extensively in the Enclosure Acts of the back in the UK from the 1700s and 1800s, partly because they were so fast growing, and a hawthorn plant that was just planted into the land, into the ground, would grow very easily, so much so that it was called quickthorn. Didn't need it. It could just be a branch from a hawthorn. It didn't need to actually be to have roots or anything like that. The second phase of interest in hedgerows and hedge laying came in the 1840s, when the Osage orange, which was native to the lower parts of the US, was introduced to the Midwest, where it was planted extensively to control erosion within the prairie areas. John Wright famously said that an Osage orange hedge, the best type of Osage orange hedge, when laid, would be horse high, bull strong, and pick tight. And you can see, I mean, anyone who's had any experience of Osage orange, and we have a couple up here in Caledon, strangely enough, where itinerant farm workers came up and planted these hedgerows for farmers up here. I suspect not really caring or knowing whether the trees were going to take or not, but indeed they did in some areas, and they're pretty vicious thorns. So really good hedgerow material. And a second time of planting of the Osage orange was again in the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, when many Osage oranges and other trees were planted to attempt to control the ongoing erosive problems within the Dust Bowl area in the Midwest. Now, it's tempting to think about the Europeans as introducing the idea of fences and living fences into North America. But if we look, we can find that the original inhabitants of North America were also using hedgerows of a sort. More really dead hedgerows, which are considered the sort of prototype of modern hedgerows. If you have a chance to get hold of the fantastic European field boundaries by Georg Müller, who sadly died last year. This is a 2-volume edition, and you can see in it there he talks about really early stick picket fences, which were used by people after the last ice age, and possibly even before the last age, as livestock boundaries. And these fences that are now found, these caribou fences, so they're used as surrounds in which caribou were herded and then slaughtered within these surrounds, called thal, by the Wuntertgwitchin in the Yukon in Western North America. So today, the main interest in hedgerows is coming from two areas. And the first is agroforestry. And agroforestry is really the use of trees within the agricultural landscape. And in North America, windbreaks and shelter belts have been a key practice really since European settlement for the benefits of, for the many benefits really. And you can see in this top right slide here, the idea that they can be used for as riparian buffer strips, as biological corridors to allow the movement of animals through the landscape, to control wind and erosion from water, much as what I previously described, really. It's one of the main hedgerows are one of the main categories of modern agroforestry in North America. Hedgerows as windbreaks or shelter belts. Now in Europe, parts of Europe, the management of hedgerows is really important for the key definition to the idea of hedgerows. And it's often also overlooked that within agroforestry circles that that hedgerows have a cultural service, which often goes amiss. So what do we mean by cultural or socio-ecological value of hedgerows? So in parts of Europe, there is actually, originating in France, there's actually a term for a hedge landscape, which, as you can see here, the picture is very much of smallish fields surrounded by hedgerows, which link farmhouses and ponds in a sort of mosaic landscape. And this is called bocage. And there have been some comparisons of European and North American hedgerow landscape by people like Suarezcin in 1990, who actually did a sort of study, cross-cultural study of hedgerows and hedge laying in England and in the Delta area of British Columbia. But there's really been no comprehensive assessment of cultural attitudes to woody linear features in North America. When we talk about socio-ecology of hedgerows, what we're saying is basically that there is an interaction between people and between the ecology of hedgerows. So it's often said that hedgerows aren't really aren't a natural feature. They may be semi-natural, but they're not a natural feature, which I often contest, really, because I'm very happy to contest, really, because the integration of humans into the landscape has been going on for hundreds and thousands of years, and the shaping of the landscape by humans is no less natural than a beaver. So a hedgerow is really just as natural as a beaver dam. So in terms of the interactions of hedgerows with people with the ecological landscape, what we find, what hedgerows show us, is that a type of socio-ecological diversity emerges, which is actually very important for thinking about various different ideas of sense of place, the idea that we have an attachment to place that's important for our social well-being. We can look at things like the importance of rural livelihoods and rural communities for a sense of finding ourselves again in a world that may rapidly be moving towards a new phase of post-growth economies, if you like. And hedgerows and hedge laying show us this, because wherever you have had hedge laying in the UK and Europe, there are different regional styles that have emerged, much as you would see with a species that was isolated over a certain amount of time. If those of you who have biologically trained or ecologically trained amongst you, you'd see speciation occur. Well, with hedgerows, it's something similar, because we have like 30 different regional styles, and accompanying that, we have different styles of tools and billhooks that are emerging. So this is really important in terms of identifying how diversity and context can arise when you have an interaction between people and the natural landscape. So the hedge laying in the Ontario Landscape Project was, still is a project that I continue to manage, and it was started back in 2013 now by Professor Steve Quilley at the University of Waterloo. And the idea behind it was to explore landscape planning and management practices within the Greater Golden Horseshoe. And Steve was very interested in hedgerows and hedge laying and other traditional rural skills for the reasons that we've just spoken about how they provide a sense of connection to the landscape and the emergence of perhaps novel relationships between humans and the natural world. So the main themes that we were looking at in the project and continue to look at are the ideas of placemaking, how hedgerows can contribute to that, of collective stewardship, and the idea of management of lands as a commons, the idea of the concepts of agroecology, so as we've spoken about before, but particularly really important as well as this function of resilience, which is can be described in many different ways. But when we are thinking about going forward into a world where we're all adapting to climate change, resilience begins in the local area. And the more attached you are to the place where you live, the more likely you are to sort of take care of it and build the resilience of your community in that place. So the project started with, or certainly didn't start, but started with a trip to the UK to one of the to the National Hedge Laying Society competition in 2015. And then in 2016, myself, Nigel Adams and Jeff Gielen were invited to do some hedgerow demonstrations at various sites within the Greater Golden Horseshoe, one of which was Mount Wolf Farm, where I'm at now, and the other one was at the Quilley property in Elora. And subsequent to this, 3 pilot plantings for hedgerows were initiated at Mount Wolf Farm, at another local farm, a community farm in Albion Hills, and a private property in Inglewood. Now, this is the hedgerow that we laid in 2016 at Mount Wolf Farm. It's actually very difficult to find a hedgerow that was ready to be laid. So what we did here was, after much frustrated walking around Mount Wolf Farm, we found a forest boundary that was suitable for hedge laying. And as you'll see, that's become a theme in hedge laying demonstrations in North America. And this is a collection of predominantly ash, but with high bush cranberry, European buckthorn as well. It shouldn't really have a circle on the top of the bindings, which were ash binders taken from the forest behind. But this was an addition by farm manager Sarah Dollamore, who is the farm manager at Mount Wolf Farm, and she's very artistic, so we let her do that. And that was a demonstration. This is the demonstration at the Quilley property as well, Professor Quilley's property, where we did some other bits of hedge laying. Again, this is as you can see the hedge at Mount Wolf Farm, and there are various members of local organisations like the Town of Caledon, the Toronto Region Conservation Volunteers, Toronto Region Conservation Authority, that were invited to view the hedgerow and have a discussion. And we had a webinar at the time also, and a workshop on the farm to talk about hedgerows and the uses of hedgerows in the landscape. This is the first hedgerow that we planted at Mount Wolf Farm. This is a mixture of a number of different species, such as American hazelnut, grey dogwood, chokecherry, chokeberry, nannyberry, arrowwood, and serviceberry and fragrant sumac. So a big range of species were going in there. We were advised by the Toronto Region Conservation Authority on the types of plants that we could use, and Nigel had a visit to one of their nurseries to talk about some of the the plants that might be best suited to hedge laying in the future when this hedgerow is ready. And trees that you can use for hedgerows are predominantly, well, almost entirely deciduous trees. There aren't any conifers, as far as I'm aware, that respond to coppicing by sending up new shoots. This hedgerow is planted in a traditional 5 plants per meter spacing for a hedgerow in 2 double rows. You know, the plants are all mixed up. They're not planted in clumps or anything like that. The second hedgerow was planted at Albion Hills, and because of the deer pressure involved, that had to be fenced off as well. That's a picture in its early infancy where it's had lots of weeds growing up, and I have to go and take another updated picture of that. And the third one was a hedgerow that was planted in a private property, this hedgerow 1 round here. They wanted to do to plant hedgerows for the livestock animals that they had, and tried different types of hedgerows. So that's a project that's ongoing. And there's some pictures from the hedge there. So as we said, we were supported very much by the Toronto Region Conservation Authority, who actually supplied all the plants and even the labour for this project under their Rural Water Quality Programme, which is a very exciting, and it was great to work with them. One of the hedgerows, actually, the first hedgerow that you saw, we planted with volunteers from the farm, and we did it as part of a kind of ritual planting, if you like, which I'm more than happy to talk about, but perhaps not now. But something called the Hedgerow Rite, which was a kind of literary performance event that was staged into the planting of the hedgerow. Here we go with another shot. This is round the bowl within Mount Wolf Farm, lots of grassland. And here's Sarah showing off our hedgerows along the edge of the bowl here. And you know, we're hoping one day, we don't have at the moment, to have sheep grazing in there as well. And I think it would make a wonderful experiment of our fully grown hedge once it's done. And there's me with my back to that hedgerow that was planted along the top there. And as you can see, this is like 3 years on, and it's doing really, really, really well. Not all of the hedgerow at Mount Wolf Farm has done well for various different reasons. The ones planted on the slope beforehand, let's just go back to that. No, we won't. The ones planted on the slope, let's get back there. These ones here have struggled to grow at any speed because of the conditions on there. It's the water tends to run off quite easily, so they need lots of mulch. And we've also had problems with black walnut poisoning some of the trees as well. And we'll just have to replant and keep going. So, as well as the hedgerow planting projects with the hedgerows in the Ontario Landscape Project, we've set up a rural skills network with the key skill that we're actually sharing is hedge laying. So we do hedge laying workshops. This is at Spruce Lane Farm, and every autumn we have groups of people out here to continue this work. It's not very fast work because, you know, we're teaching people, and it takes time to do it. And this is working actually on a European buckthorn hedge, which the farmer, you know, has a problem with in terms of it just keeps growing and it's an invasive plant. And really, European buckthorn is something that conservation authorities ask people to eradicate because it's an invasive species. But there's so much of it out there, and the farmer didn't want to lose this. Didn't want to lose the hedge because he has dairy cattle on one side of that hedge, you know, pasturing there, and it's a good source of shade. So we offered to manage it for him, you know, in a way that So, you know, both parties benefit really. He gets his hedge managed, and we get a hedge to manage. So that's a really great collaboration going on there. We do other skills with the Ontario Rural Skills Network, including spoon carving, you know, as an introduction to green woodwork. We have scything as well, and basket making, and you know, we're hoping to get onto, and we have a blacksmith's forge as well. So if anyone's in the area and is interested, please have a look at Ontario Rural Skills Network. So we also managed, we also did a bit of hedge laying on a line of black walnut. So it's a bit of an experiment really. This line, it's a double line of black walnut, which was originally planted by Sarah's grandfather, who was very, very keen on reforesting the whole of this farm. When they moved here in the 1950s, the farm was very, was a traditional farm, traditional, by which I mean, you know, it was farmland, very few trees, and a farmhouse. And the Arnold and Sheila Crandall decided to go about reforesting the farm, basically. And he was really keen on black walnut. And as you can see here, he planted lots of black walnut around the farm, but then sort of ran out of space and decided to heel what he had left into the ground in two lines like this. And I don't think he knew at the time, how could he, that this was the perfect spacing for a hedge laying demonstration. So with the permission of the Crandall family, who are now the owners of the farm, who continue to be the owners of the farm, I should say, the Sarah being the third generation on the farm, we decided to lay it as a hedge. And here we have laying the hedge over, laying the pleaches over, so cutting through each of these uprights 2/3 of the way through, laying them over. So as you can see here, this is not the black walnut hedge, but gives you an example of what we mean when we say we're cutting 2/3 of the way through, and leaning it over, and you can see the lovely cut surface of the pleacher going into the stakes there. And then we used ash stakes, which were easily found around the farm, and willow binders. And this is the first year's regrowth, which was really good, and it's looking fantastic at the moment. And as far as I'm aware, this is the only hedge laid black, sorry, yeah, the only laid black walnut hedge in existence. So if anyone knows any different, please let me know. So, and as an offshoot of the Ontario hedge laying in the Ontario Landscape Project, we, Sarah and I, started a company, a startup called the Hedgerow Co. We're very small at the moment, but our first project, you're going to be hearing about a little later from Jake Murray, which was going to plant a hedge. Well, in fact, we did two. We did a hedge laying demonstration on the farm, taking some of the hawthorns that existed in a very, very random way. There was no hedgerow per se that we could lay, but what we did was constructed this half living, half dead hedge in a south of England style hedgerow over there. And then just a little bit further on from it, we started planting another hedgerow, which will in the future be laid as a species-rich hedgerow. So you'll hear, as I said, you'll hear more about that project from Jake Murray in just a little while. And then finally, the North American Hedgerow Society. This came about after through the Facebook group which exists for coppicing, pollarding, and hedge laying in North America. So if any of you haven't got on that Facebook site, I suggest you do. On which Rob Gill, who's a farmer in Vermont, advertised or first put forward the idea of getting some hedge layers over from the UK to teach hedge laying. well, it just so happened that I saw that that post, and very quickly we established a kind of a group of interested people, including Steve Gabriel from Wellspring Forest Farm. And the original idea was to have hedge laying classes at Rob's farm in Vermont, and then go on to Wellspring Forest Farm to have hedge laying workshops there as well, and then finally come back and have something similar at the at Mount Wolf Farm as well. So it was a pure demonstration of North American hedge laying. So we didn't do that, unfortunately. There weren't enough people at the time, or even hedgerows that we could lay at Rob's property. So we just decided we would do the workshops at Wellspring Forest Farm and then come back to Mount Wolf Farm in Caledon to finish off. So it was at Wellspring Forest Farm where we first mooted the idea of the North American Hedgerow Society and decided this was going to be the inaugural event, I should say. So here we are on the first day of the workshops, where we're actually managing a willow hedge that was very, very long, and really more like something that we would normally back in Europe, in England, would coppice as opposed to hedge lay. But we thought it was the perfect. It was perfectly good to do a hedge laying workshop on. So we did that on the first day with a group of people. And as you can see, made a really, really good effort from what we had there. And you can see in a bit that Steve will also update us on how that hedge is doing. We also laid a hedge. We laid two more hedges on the second day, one in the style which is called the South of England style, which I led with some chaps at the edge of some woodland. See what I mean by that, edge of woodland being a good place to lay hedgerows, or at least to demonstrate laying of hedgerows, partly because you have a number of stems that are already in existence, but mostly you don't have the density of stems that you need to lay a good hedge. So there's a lot of infilling with dead hedge material as well, but it still has the same rigid structure, if not. And what you can then do, if you've got plants left over, you can then interplant to allow the hedgerow to grow up thicker than it was originally. And there's the finished product. Another element that came out of the hedge laying in the Ontario Landscape Project was further work with the Toronto Region Conservation Authority. They were very interested as original partners in the hedge laying in the Ontario Landscape Project. They were very interested to see what applications for hedgerows might be in the Rouge National Urban Park, that was one of the newest national parks in Canada, which was and the Rouge National Park is, as it says in the title, really on the fringes of Toronto. So it's a cross between a national park and an urban park, and there's lots of farming and agriculture within it. So it seemed the perfect fit to have a look at how hedgerows might be used. So I consulted on that project, and we planted a species-rich hedgerow. You can't see it too well in these pictures. At one place within the Rouge National Urban Park. I did write a report with the express recommendations that they actually go a bit more, do more than just one hedgerow, and perhaps they could think about creating a novel ecosystem within the urban park, which would be a hedgerow network, a bocage landscape, but that wasn't taken up at the time. That report is available for reading if anyone's interested as well. So the National So the North American Hedgerow Society aims to provide information for anyone who is interested in planting and managing hedgerows. And the first thought really about planting is what to plant. And as I've said earlier, when you're considering planting a hedgerow, think about plants that coppice really well. We have a list here that I'm going to put up on the website as well, that I hope is going to build into a database of plants that you can use in hedgerows. So I'll be collecting, or will be collecting, information about plants in North America. We know some of the plants that will work really well, and have similar because of plants that work in the UK and Europe, and have similar types over here. Indeed, there's a number of different hawthorn plants over here that could be used together with things like Osage orange and the acacia plants that have like black acacia that have been recommended for use in agroforestry. The only problem is that with some of those, including black acacia, is the way it really takes off and can become a pest if you don't manage it. But we're talking about management as well as being a key part of hedgerows within hedgerow management. So that will be coming soon. If you'd and I very much appreciate any information you'd like to send our way to be included in that going forward. That's the plantings there, which I brought up. You can have a look at that by pausing now and scribbling those all down that we used in the plantings at Mount Wolf Farm and Topsy Farm. So yeah, finally getting to the end now of my piece. We have the North American Hedgerow Society, which aims to be a website and a society that really works for you. So I'd like to hear from people about what they want to come out of the North American Hedgerow Society. You'll find the website will grow. At the moment, I'm planning to do things further on the history and culture of hedgerows in North America. I'm writing a paper at the moment. I've been writing it for far too long, and it needs to get finished on a literature review that I did of papers on hedgerows in North America, and see what themes can be teased out of that. We're looking at hedgerow planting. How do we want to proceed with this? Very much what I think is very, very important, and I hope you all agree, is that when thinking about hedgerows and hedge laying as a management style, that we want to build on the idea of this cultural diversity. So we actually, there is a basic technique to hedge laying that we would be good to use, but then build upon and add, North American themes. So depending on where you are in North America and the plants that you're using, we need to let the styles and the themes and the influences of our landscapes filter into the work that we do in creating these living fences. So they're not all the same, and we're not just copying the European style or the particular English style, and seeing what we can. Maybe we have bioregional styles. Bioregionalism is a really well spoken of way of kind of organizing resources, and perhaps hedgerows can come out of bioregional styles. One idea would also be to have demonstration farms and small holdings where we can start to plant hedgerows. I've got a number of people that I'm working with through the Hedgerow Co at the moment, developing hedgerows with a view to manage them in the future, and also along the lines of the work I did for the TRCA, maybe thinking of urban and public areas. So, you know, if you work for a municipality or local government and you think this would be a nice idea to have a community managed, community planted and community laid hedgerow in the future as an investment in your local community that might have lots of foraging resources on it, for instance, do get in touch. So the website will also include things like hedgerow management, and will advertise events, so training workshops for hedge laying, but also hopefully in the future training you to train other people in hedgerows. And we'll have hedge laying competitions at some point. There'll be sections for resources and hopefully one day a shop as well. So yeah, and I'm working with an artist at the moment to produce a hedge laying guide for North America, which will be a really basic thing to begin with, and we'll just include a basic idea of how to go about hedge laying. There are lots of resources on the internet as well where you can probably figure that out, but I think it would be relevant to have something that everybody can that you can access through the North American Hedgerow Society, and that does reflect our own or North American tastes and ideas. So what else? You let me know, and I'll be really interested to hear from people. So that's the end of this section of the talk, and I am now going to introduce Jake Murray from Topsy Farms. He is going to talk about the work that he's doing up in Amherst Island with the family-run farm at Topsy Farms, and the work that we did this summer on hedgerows there. So over to you, Jake.
In 1972, a boatload of earthy, back-to-the-land hippies started a commune at the west end of Amherst Island. Most of them had never been in the country before. Most of them had never been on a farm before. What they did know was that society was smelling off and they wanted to do something about it. By the mid-70s, the commune dissolved, but the members who remained formed Topsy Farms, a business built on those hippie ideas of harmony with the land and the animals and each other. And they got sheep. They got a lot of sheep, and they figured out how to raise them all year round in Canada, outdoors, so that those animals are happy and healthy and sleeping under the shady trees and grazing the green pastures. That is fundamentally a part of who we are. Topsy Farms has always been welcoming of visitors. In the 90s, we went a little bit further and opened an outlet shop here on the farm called the Wool Shed. We turned our raw wool into blankets and yarn and other value-added goods. In 2018, Topsy Farms faced a big choice. Some of those founding members were of retirement age and needed to get their equity out of the business. Here was the question: do we sell off the land? Do we sell off the animals? Do we pay them and walk away? Or do we take out a big, giant, scary mortgage and work this land as hard as we possibly could? That's what we chose, and that is what we have been doing for the last 3.5 years.
We live in a spot that is surrounded by water and good people. Our Victory Garden project is an extension and continuation of that idea. Planting gardens during a time of uncertainty was a good way for people to spend their time. So when Kubota heard that we were going to be planting gardens for our neighbors, they offered the use of their equipment, which for us, it couldn't have been better timed. So because of the help that we have received, we've been able to do 20 gardens in 30 days. It's So today we are building a garden that has been customized for our new neighbors, Martin and Gladys. And we could not think of a better way to end this project, and we could not think of better human beings to do this with.
Okay, so now you're caught up. 49 years and 3 minutes, that's pretty good. So rewilding, building hedgerows, permaculture, giving nature back to nature. Why? What is the point? For a farm like this, it is all about biodiversity, that a healthy, happy nature makes a healthy, happy farm. Those hippie founders, they say that this is the best thing that we have ever done because it will outlast us.
Welcome back to Global News Morning. Time to take a little trip to Topsy Farms. You can find Topsy Farms on Amherst Island. That happens to be the home and the workplace of one of the coolest guys in the region. This is Jake Murray. Giving nature back to nature. Explain rewilding.
Farms can be nature's best friend. Humans can do a better job as caretakers. Sometimes those wild plants and animals need our help. Rewilding creates the opportunity for balance, for partnership, for a better, greener future. A better future for all of us. Rewilding.
You're doing this on purpose and actually cultivating it. How come?
How come indeed? Well, our goal is 1 kilometer worth of hedgerow and buffer strip and permaculture forest put back to the exclusive use of nature by 2023. It is a thing we have wanted to do for decades, but now we finally have the follow through and the ambition to actually make this happen.
Just wanted to do a quick video of what we accomplished yesterday. So we have, coming up the farm laneway, a ready spot for some sunflowers. This is where the hedge planting starts. Right there, look at all those sweet little trees. Here is the existing hedgerow that Jim and Sarah from that Hedgerow Co. did a month ago.
So what are our future plans? We're going to keep going. We're going to keep working. We're going to keep doing our best every single day because we know it is right. We know what we have to do. We will keep giving nature back to nature as much as we can. We will keep providing a healthy, safe, happy home for the sheep and the animals on this property. We will work, we will strive, we will fail, we will get up, we will dust off, we will do it again. Thank you for following our journey. Thank you for your interest in the hedgerows. Thank you for helping us to keep the farmland as a farm.